Hi, everybody. I just want to get a sense of who's in the room with it. So raise your hand if you develop special needs housing. Okay. How about social service providers in special needs housing? Okay. So obviously there might be some overlap there. Folks that are in government? Okay. Okay. How about anyone who finances or on the legal end? Okay. And how about representatives that have been, part of a community process of acceptance, but not as the developer, but as a community member? Okay. Great. Okay. So thanks. That's helpful. So just a little bit of my background, because I think it helps frame the conversation a little bit. So I started my professional career in New York City as a social worker, providing social services to homeless women that were seriously and persistently mentally ill at a transitional living community where in 4 to 6 months' time we helped stabilize the women and then place them into permanent supportive housing. I did that, and then this is with CUCS, and then later went back to CUCS after actually running Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez's district office, and obviously lots of need for affordable housing in that congressional district, if you're familiar with that district. And then went back to CUCS and ran social services in supportive housing up in Washington Heights and Harlem. Now, at Fifth Avenue Committee, we're the developer and manager of affordable housing, including supportive housing, and we've developed 900 units of affordable and mixed income housing. About 126 of those are supportive services with on-site social services, and over 75 additional units among the 900 that we've developed have set-asides for formerly homeless families, some of whom have special needs, some of whom don't. But I think that background's helpful, and so Fifth Avenue Committee, we don't just build affordable housing or supportive housing. We are a 36-year-old comprehensive community development corporation whose mission is to advance economic and social justice. So that grounds who we are. And since the organization inception in Brooklyn, in an area which many years ago had abandoned buildings and vacant lots and now has multi-million-dollar brownstones, we've really had two pillars in terms of the organization's work. One was community organizing and advocacy, and the other was really the physical revitalization of the community, primarily through redevelopment, either new construction or rehabbing homes. So we've evolved over the years and now provide a number of services, workforce and services in adult education and literacy, but not a social service provider in the traditional sense in supportive housing. I say all that because that's helpful background for some stories that I want to share about one project in particular. And on the chair as you came in, I hope folks took some information about 575 Fifth Avenue in the siting process that we went through for that, because I think listening to Amy and hearing some of the best practices, we did all the best practices in terms of tours and doing the 15-minute coffee sessions and meeting with people and meeting with community board members, but we still faced fierce opposition to this project, and primarily it was because it's at that time and continues to be an area that's facing tremendous gentrification pressures. So a lot of new folks actually moving into the neighborhood at a very different income level than the folks that were there previously. And so, there was a lot of concern about the property value issue that was raised. But, and I think it's helpful as background in going to the depoliticizing piece. So that building is located, so current Mayor de Blasio, that was his council district at the time. And so there's no question that part of the conversation became political, partly because some of the folks involved in the conversation had larger political aspirations, and you want to make sure that, any politician wants to make sure that they're responsive to community concerns, but obviously if you have long-term political aspirations, sometimes you might be even more sensitive to those things than others. I think a couple different pieces. Again, I mentioned our mission about advancing economic and social justice because I think it's important. Amy mentioned the issue about kind of fear and misunderstanding about what supportive housing is or what special needs housing is. But I think it's also important to kind of name certain things. There's racism, there's stigma around mental illness, there's a lot of, legitimate or not legitimate concern about public safety and fear that come up in these conversations, and we certainly chose to address all of those kind of head-on, both in a community education sort of way, but also in a one-on-one way and also at the community level. But also to name that, and we did door-to-door outreach. We were, again, as an organization that does community organizing, we approached it as a community organizing campaign, and not just a development project that we were doing. And despite that, we still faced a pretty significant opposition. And the city of New York. The land that we built on was publicly owned land. We had to go through the city's Uniform Land Use and Review Procedure process, which is a process that is defined, though I'm not so sure people are clear that oftentimes projects, you can be opposed in the process and there can be no votes, especially at the community board or at the borough president level, but that doesn't mean that a project's not going to move forward. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how that works. I think that's an important piece. And the city of New York was a partner with Fifth Avenue Committee as we did our outreach to the community. They certainly didn't tell us, because we know the community, who to go meet with. We were telling them who the city of New York needed to meet with, because we're a community development corporation with roots in the neighborhood, which the project happened. But I think we were the ones leading those conversations. They, before the official formal part of the process started, for those of you who know ULURP, you know that there's a time clock and there's formal processes and there's hearings and things like that. But we did, many of our outreach meetings were before that process, and that's the part that's undefined, right? There's no definition from the city besides you should go meet with the community board, and it'd be nice if you get a letter, in advance of a hearing or something like that. That certainly would be helpful, I think, having that level of clarity about what the before formal process should look like, so that at the very least you can make sure that you're meeting those expectations. Even during the process, I think there are opportunities for all the different participants to understand. I mean, find everybody. Hopefully people have copies of this plan, right? The Housing New York, the 5-borough 10-year plan for the 200,000 units. And the reality is that in order to achieve this plan, there has to be buy-in at the community level, whether it's around the supportive housing component of the plan, whether it's the part of the plan that talks about density, and the need to balance density with investments in infrastructure. And the city has to be, can't be reactive in that process. It has to be proactive in its outreach to communities, in educating folks. I know that a big piece of what the Fifth Avenue Committee does whenever we talk about a project, and we're also an affordable housing advocate, is really helping people understand that we're expecting nearly 1 million people, additional people in the city of New York, in the next 25 years. And we already have an affordable housing crisis. And even if we build these 200,000 units, which is an incredibly bold plan, we'll still be short of what we need in the affordable housing in the city of New York. And obviously the supportive housing component is a component of those 200,000 units. So you can do all that educating, but quite honestly, the other piece that we do is because the people that are moving into the housing aren't at the table, right? They have to be brought to the table in some ways. That way there's a counterbalance to the stakeholders that are already there. And so, we educate and, quite honestly, do a lot of leadership development with the tenants of our existing supportive housing so that they tell their stories. They're not, so people aren't just passively going on tour of where they live, but we're doing leadership development of the tenants and the properties we're working with, and they become voices for the people that will move into the properties in the future as in part of telling their story. And I'm sure other folks in the room do that as well, but it's incredibly powerful, when someone can say, I'm the person you're afraid of. I'm the formerly homeless person that happens to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and guess what? This project saved my life. It's amazing. People are for housing for vets, and people are, for housing people that are homeless, but then, when you kind of put it in their backyard or, put it next to their home, all of a sudden they become concerned about it. And I think part of it is just really introducing the people to each other, honestly, and helping people see that these really are people, and that absolutely have needs and have the right to live with dignity and respect in housing, just like the rest of us. So that's broad brush. I mean, the other perspective that I have, and we have Karen Phillips here, who also sat on the City Planning Commission, and I actually think you were on the commission when we came forward for the 575 Fifth Avenue project. We had busloads of people testify at this project to make sure that it was really clear that the community wanted this housing. Maybe there were 5 or 6 people who didn't want it and who were spreading lies. People said it was going to be a prison. People said, black men who are coming out of prison, it was going to be a methadone clinic, sex offenders, all the things that you hear about the projects. Those were the things that were being said about the project. We're like, okay, well, we'll help you understand what it's really going to be. Game on, and, brought out lots of folks. But the City Planning Commission is, it's a body of 13 folks, 7 appointed by the mayor, 1 by each borough president, and then 1 by the public advocate. And both Karen and I were appointees of the public advocate, so we tend to have a lot more latitude as a public advocate appointee to kind of speak truth to power in many of these circumstances. And what's interesting is the body of experts in your individual area, but it doesn't mean people are necessarily expert in supportive housing. And so some of the same misconceptions that the public has about what the supportive housing is, even planning commissioners have. And so going to your point about, making sure that there's really broad understanding about what is this model of housing and how has it been successful over the last 25 years in addressing some intractable societal issues is really important for every level of involvement in a discussion. Whether it's a community board involvement, a borough president involvement, a city planning commission involvement, city council member involvement. The reality is people don't, understandably, don't necessarily know the nuances of how successful this model of housing has been in not only addressing, homelessness, but really also being a resource to other low and moderate income folks in the community. In New York City, we have the 50% preference for local community members. That's significant. We have all kinds of senior citizens and youth aging out of foster care who wouldn't access those units, affordable housing otherwise, were not for supportive housing and the community preference. And those are some of the preferences, going to Oliver's question, that the community wants to see. They want to know where their seniors are going to live. They want to know where, my son who just graduated from college and got a job but really can't afford anything can live. And in New York City, because the affordable housing crisis is at such epic proportions, people do want affordable housing. They don't want supportive housing because they don't understand it. And so, quite honestly, when we market it and when we sell it, we talk about it as affordable supportive housing, as, it's affordable first, supportive second, kind of a thing. And we think that's important because it's pretty critical as part of helping people really understand what it is and what it isn't. So I'll stop there and let folks ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. it's interesting that your experience at 575 was, it sort of took place in the context of a ULURP process, but many supportive projects are as of right from a zoning perspective and don't, so sort of they don't have the framework of ULURP, for the good and the bad. So there's really nothing sort of out there to guide the process or even to provide a context for the community and the developer to have a conversation. So, and this is really not just a question for you, this is for Amy or Cynthia. I mean, do you have thoughts about what could sort of substitute for, not like an alternative ULURP, but some sort of process or framework for putting communities together with developers and making it a constructive conversation?
I mean, I think there are elements that exist, that do exist in ULURP. I mean, I do think the outreach to the community board is critical. Not every community board in New York City is representative of the community, though, and so you really do need to understand who are the community stakeholders in the neighborhood who might oppose or who would be for the project. And so I do believe, I mean, again, it's a campaign. It's community organizing. It's basic community organizing. You find out, you map out the community you're in, you find out who the stakeholders are, who are your allies, who might be your opponents. You set up meetings with them. Start with one-on-one, and then you build to broader community meetings. The open mic thing, we fell prey to that, partly because, quite honestly, our elected officials asked us to do it as part of addressing the community's concerns. I would definitely recommend trying not to do that. But I do believe those are some of the most important pieces. Definitely having all levels of government that might later come back to you and, midway through when you've already designed your building and ask you to move your entrance or something like that. Not that I've had that experience. I think those are the things that you want to do as early as possible.